What we're going to be talking about is what is strength testing and why do we do it? I'm just going to give you a little bit of background from my lens. I worked in Major League Baseball with the Los Angeles Angels, and I got to see firsthand of what happens if you write generalized arm strength programming. A lot of our athletes are doing the same thing, and they don't all fatigue the same way. They don't all have the same tendencies. They also don't throw the same velocities. And with the generalized approach, we didn't have a lot of success. But once we went to dynamometry, which is a fancy word for saying strength testing, using a force testing unit, we were able to create custom programs for the throwing arm. And I was helped by Jordan Oseguera, who's on this call, and he can kind of communicate what he did in the realm of why this is important and how we had benefits from it.
Yeah, so obviously I'm looking at things through a pitching coach lens. You're looking at it from a strength conditioning lens because we had those different roles within that. But the big thing that I always point out is it's about preventing movement compensation. You want an athlete to move as consistently as possible, because if you're moving with consistency, you're going to perform a lot more consistently as well. And one of the big issues that we always had, especially I'm just as guilty of it as any other pitching coach that's out there, is we would see a movement pattern we didn't like, and we'd instantly start attacking mechanics, when in reality, it's a strength deficiency or a strength imbalance. And once we're able to kind of hammer that out, now we're starting to get into the basis of why, from a skill standpoint, measuring and evaluating your strength is important. And I don't want to jump too far ahead and start talking about fatigue. I know we're going to get into it a little bit, but I'll let you keep going.
I'll put the visual up, because I think we're going to give you guys one thing to chew on from our courses. But this is the progression of why athletes get hurt. And we're talking about what strength testing is. We talked about force dynamometry. This is the unit that we have that's wearable, not a clunky big piece of equipment, but one where athletes use it everywhere. But this is why it's important, because the progression of injuries, it takes players off the mound. Jordan's a baseball guy, but one of the things I ask a lot of coaches is what is the most important metric for coaches? And really, you get a whole bunch of things. You get spin rates, and you get spin axes, you get a lot of ball flight metrics, but the key to everything, in my opinion, is innings pitched. If you don't have your pitchers on the mound, you got a problem. And so the first progression of these injuries, they come from fatigue. And so you need to understand, how is this athlete responding to workloads? This is what makes our product very unique, is that the athlete can take it with them. If they can't do it right after the game, they can do it when they get back to their hotel room at home, that you can get a good understanding of what was taken out of that arm from a force perspective. And then the next progression is poor recovery. We don't want to get into a place where you test once, an athlete comes in at spring training, or they come at the fall for a college season, or they might even be tested at all at the youth level. And then you don't reassess them consistently enough, so you don't know how they recover. And in those conversations, you can look at arm strength as a window into behaviors like how they eat, how they sleep, their preparation habits. Are they overtraining? These are things that you're going to see evaluation to evaluation. And then the next progression is weakness. If you go from fatigue, you don't recover well, muscles are going to get weak. And then in the furthest element of this on this spectrum is biomechanical compensation. It's a fancy word. I thought it would be easier for you guys to just see a picture, but those are changes in the movement of the delivery that cause significant loading, changes in loading on the throwing arm. One that's really easy to see when a player is weakening in terms of lifting their arm upward is that they start to lean. They want to have a consistent ball release, and they don't want to lose velocity. So when they start moving more towards their glove side, they got elbow problems. And Jordan, I want you to go into this, because this is like, on the performance side is important too, the stack and track concept.
Yeah, so it's something that sounds complex, but it's actually pretty simple. And what it comes down to is it's what you're doing with that torso and your body at ball release. So your torso on average is roughly about 40% of your body weight. So if that is over rotating or moving more towards that glove side when you're pitching, you're taking 40% of your energy and you're landing it on a joint, number one. So it's going to put a little extra stress that's not normal on there. It's also going to not allow you to direct that energy as much. So instead of using your body to throw, you're now relying on that strength and length. So that's a compensation that's not going to be a benefit. So what you have with that, if you're able to direct that 40% of your body weight better towards the target, you're going to have more force behind the ball. It's going to have less stress. And what a lot of people don't realize is that head movement, one of the good generalizations that I find still holds up pretty true, not 100% across the board, but pretty dang close to it, is if your head moves early, which is before foot strike, that's a biomechanical issue that you can kind of get in there and start working on. But after you've landed, and if your head's moving after that, that's now a strength imbalance or a fatigue issue. And you got to start hammering that out, because you can try to fix it with mechanics, but now you're changing the way that body's moving and you're adding new stresses to it when your body's trying to adapt, and you're creating a problem. So really important to pay attention to what that head movement is doing after foot strike, because 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a strength related issue. And hopefully I covered that in the direction that you were thinking, because I can go a million ways with it.
Yeah.
Hey, I got a quick question here. So just feeding off of this, Jordan, what are some typical signs of fatigue that a coach or a parent can identify? Is it, are we going to lose velocity? Are we going to lose control? Or are there, are there other signs of fatigue, that we can identify on the mound?
Yeah. So there's a lot of rabbit holes that you can go down on this one, but the big ones I always tell people to pay attention to is, number one, tempo. Is their internal tempo changing? Because if you start seeing these guys that are normally quick, or maybe they work at a moderate pace and all of a sudden that slows down. And now at the high school level, they don't have pitch clocks. You're not going to get, that's not going to show up like it does at the pro level now. So it's really important for mom and dad to pay attention. Like, what is my son's tempo? What is my daughter's tempo? There's more girls getting into pitching now too, but what is their tempo? Pay attention to that, and how are they varying off that average tempo? Number two, if your kid is normally missing, we'll just say, volleyball size, and then all of a sudden it moves to basketball, to beach ball, to, huge medicine ball size of misses, pay attention to where they're averagely spraying the ball. No one's going to be pinpoint surgical with that fastball, but if all of a sudden those misses keep getting bigger and bigger, and normally if they are missing, they're setting up glove side, missing glove side, all of a sudden they're setting up glove side, missing middle on a regular basis, it's going to happen no matter what. But if it's becoming a common theme where those misses are getting bigger, probably a fatigue thing. Everyone wants to go to velo. They want to bring out the pocket radar, bring out the stalker, and invest in all that, when in reality, just bring a stopwatch, track where your kid's throwing, and understand where they're at on those internal tempos. And that's going to be a good time to go, we need to start checking that post exam.
Yeah. I mean, for me, just some of the similar signs, and we talk about it in our courses, athlete takes their hat off. They're excessively sweating when they're wiping themselves. How long they're off the mound. You see a lot of pitchers that start to fatigue. They start to walk around. They don't stand up there because they don't want to get right back to it, especially with not having the time limit. But then breaths, when you watch how they breathe on the mound, some pitchers have a very consistent process. When they throw fastballs, they might take a pretty big breath. You start seeing, a lot more carbon oxide issues, dioxide issues. You're having carbon dioxide issues where they're trying to get more air in. These are things that, they're visible for sure.
Okay, one other question I have related to fatigue. So we talked about strength testing and we talk about fatigue. What is the relationship between strength testing and fatigue? Is there a relationship there?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, if you have high strength, you're really not going to be tapping into the arm as much per throw. Just kind of giving an analogy, if your bench press strength is 500 pounds and all of a sudden you raise that to 800 pounds, but to compete and win, you only need 200 pounds, you're using much less of your maximum capacity. So when you're expanding that max strength, you're actually making the athlete a lot more, call it neurologically efficient, because you're going to see less muscle strength lost after throwing bouts. That I see constantly across all levels.
Mm-hmm. And what is the goal in terms of strength loss after an outing? Is there a goal? Do we want to have too much? Where's the threshold of too little, too much in terms of strength loss after either a bullpen or pitching in a game?
Go ahead, Jordan.
So, we're going to go back to some old research that we were looking at, quite a ways back when I was first getting into dynamometry in roughly 2010, and still kind of getting my feet wet in this. And Ryan obviously added a lot more context to a lot of my incoherent ramblings when it came to this stuff. But what it was we found that if an athlete was losing roughly 10% strength on a 5-day rotation, now we're looking at pro players here, and I think this holds up pretty well at the collegiate and the high school level also. If they were losing 10% or less, they were able to recover by that day 3 to throw that bullpen. If they started losing 15% strength, now we were looking at day 4, sometimes day 5. And if they were losing 20% or more strength, they just weren't bouncing back. And the guys that were losing that amount of strength, especially over the course of a season, almost 100% of those guys needed surgery. Roughly about 80 some oddish percent of those guys in that 15% strength loss or under, they had flexor mass, lat strain, whatever it may be. But the guys that were 10 or under, they were bouncing back and they were improving over the course of the season. So you want to fatigue the arm. You have to fatigue to make adaptation, to grow, to get better. There's no muscle in the human body that doesn't benefit from a little bit of stress and fatigue. You just don't want to over fatigue it. And then the important thing is it's hard to say that there's too much fatigue. And I'm going to give a quick example here. I know we're running out of time, but I was actually talking with Ryan earlier on another call today, where I had one athlete who went into college. It was his freshman year, and he had thrown a 40-pitch sim game. First outing, he lost 7% strength. Perfect, right where we want him. 7 days later, he repeated the same thing. He was good on all of his fresh exams, everything. He lost 27% strength. Why? It's the same amount of pitch total, but they're very different physiologic responses. So you just need to manage that workload in between to make sure he's back to full strength by the time he's thrown again. So just because one outing you lose a lot of strength doesn't mean it's good or bad. It doesn't mean you're a bad person, definitely, but it means you need to manage that workload going into your next outing better. So you may have to deload for the next 3 days to allow those muscle groups to recover. So instead of, going in there and saying we're in a hole, we just got to dig ourselves out. That's the phrase I always like to say. You can't do that. You got to fill that hole in with recovery. On the other hand, when he had his 7% strength loss, we can actually fatigue that guy a little bit more to get the adaptation we're looking for. So adjust your routines based on that. Don't get so married that this pitch count is right. It's going to fluctuate. So you may have just thrown 110 pitches and lost 7% the week prior, and then a week later you throw 48 pitches and lose 15%. It's because we're not video games. That's why it's so important to pay attention to that fatigue data. I may have gone a little deeper than we wanted to for that, but do you have anything to add in on that, Ryan?
No, I just real quick before we wrap up here, it's, we're talking about able pitchers, but there are a lot out there that are getting injured. 5% of all pitchers, 25% of all baseball players are going to have an arm injury that's going to require surgery. So that's a quarter. Position players too. When it comes to pitchers, it's a little bit more concentrated than adding all the positions together. That's 5 in 100. The fatigue monitoring becomes even more important, guys, when they're coming back from injury. And we talked about the rehab process. What we think is a good rehab throwing program, you may find that even at the lightest amounts, your athletes are losing a ton of strength. So the key is be led by this data, maximize your arm strength so that you can handle the workloads, you can help the athlete progresses. It's the chicken or the egg. The chicken is you need to make sure that your arm's strong to be able to get the ball and to be able to throw it more often. So that, those are my final remarks for this webinar. I don't know if you have any more to add, Jordan.
I got nothing.
All right. Well, until the next one, that was great. Stay tuned.